When I first figured out that kids in Chicago had somehow got their hands on a device that turns a Glock into a semi-automatic weapon, I thought, damn, these kids advanced. Back in my day, people were stealing revolvers from their granddaddy house or just paying the guy in Indiana for something and then scratching the serial number off. They must have just 3D printed this, I thought. Because correct me if I'm wrong, it might not be where they first landed, but during the start of the pandemic, the little guys rapping in Chicago made the first mention of a switch, at least that I heard.
It was like 2020. They just came. I heard about a switch one time. I remember like, what the fuck is a switch? What is a switch? Then the more, I watch these videos, I do reactions. So the more I'm doing, I'm like, damn, that's what a switch is?
Turns out I was right about the 3D printers, which according to some sources, made it as cheap as $20 to get one. But crazy. These 3D printers were of course just duplicating something that already existed. The Auto Sear, which is what it's actually called, was created by a man who now says he regrets making this technology in the first place because of all the deaths he keeps reading about. But bro, what did you this is an attachment you put on a pistol. It's not a hunting rifle. What did you think was going to happen? Are you unclear on what a gun is for? Now, the first official appearance of the Switch was a man from Argentina selling them in the US as well as many other things, but this was way back in 2002. But they were still nowhere as popular as they are now. And it just makes me think about when I see those cartel videos and wonder how the cartels get their hands on this military equipment. Like they have standard issue equipment, custom bulletproof vests and armored vehicles.
They got all
the only thing that's stopping the gangs in the US from looking similar is honestly the fact that the guys using them on the street are not organized gangs like the Mafia or one of the very active families associated with the Saderno group in Canada I covered in one of my videos. There is no organized gang in Chicago at least, and unlike in some parts of California, you can't get put on or put off in any gang in the Midwest pretty much. And I don't think you can in New York either. I never forget visiting some of my suburban family and my auntie asking me
ain't no put-ons and put-offs. You just claim whatever you is. Some people might say you not. Some people might say you is. You just claim whatever you is, and that's what it is, folks,
I avoided getting recruited by gangs, but at least where I'm from, there's no such thing. So you can leave a gang. I remember being a kid, and I used to always see on TV that you can only leave a gang in 1 or 2 ways.
That's that California
or in a body bag. And nah, man. Unless you get backdoored, of course. Anyway, speaking of California, a gang in Fresno was one of the first in this last decade to get caught using the Switch. And it was such a crazy attack that they actually caught a RICO from it by the FBI, the ATF, and Homeland Security. It was allegedly the Mongolian Boys Society when they met up at a vacation rental to plan how they was going to get back from one of their homies that was allegedly killed by an Asian Crip. There were 6 men in total, 3 of them were just lookouts. And
these people is unalive people. See, this is why you can't judge a book by its cover. He looked like he designed computers. He looked like a janitor. He looked like he, the nigga that was fighting Jada Smith in Karate Kid, do your homework. He looked like, I don't know. He looked like a Asian actor. That nigga 30. And he looked like the Mexican little boy that played with Yu-Gi-Oh cards in 10th grade.
At least one of the 6 fired the Switch into a crowd and called a quadruple homicide. But it doesn't look like the FBI knows where they got this device. Now, going back to the guy that was first caught selling them in 2002, the ATF discovered that his business was booming and he had sent and or received 6,500 emails within a 30-day period. But where was all this business going?
I want to put y'all on to some of the easiest money you'll ever make in your life. Freecash.com is a website that allows you to literally get paid hundreds of dollars just for playing video games on your phone. All you need is an email and a password. Follow the directions on each of the campaigns and you can earn at least $100. My personal favorite game to play was Sunrise Island, and when I clicked on it, they had a $370 bonus. I got $370 just for playing a video game on my phone. On average, it only takes about 17 minutes for most people to start earning money on freecash.com. So if you need some free, easy, extra money, go to freecash.com, click the QR code right here, or go in the description below and start getting that bag. You did?
Say that at least some of his equipment came from a foreign country. And which country comes to mind when you think of mass producing someone else's invention?
China.
In 2019, the ATF found thousands of them that were illegally imported from China. But who in China is mass producing this? And who sent it overseas? And why? They seem to hit every major city at the exact same time. The only city that I noticed to kind of curb how many arrived on the streets is New York. First, it was just in the underground black market, with not just anyone having the ability to sell them. A man in Chicago was found in 2020 to have been selling switches, and during a meeting with an undercover ATF.
I think in New York, it ain't enough people with guns to shit. It ain't busting. Ain't no business up there.
Agent posing as a buyer, he told the agent that if he wanted to buy, he should buy quickly because they're gonna get bought up by the people who want to shoot some people, referring to gang members that wanted to use them on their enemies. And of course, Chicago being Chicago, they let this man out on bond, and he continued to traffic these switches before fleeing to Georgia, likely supplying people in that state as well, before finally getting rearrested 2 years later and sentenced. Around the same time, a licensed gun dealer in Miami was caught selling them under the table, and a man in Topeka, Kansas got indicted for importing them at a price of $19 a piece. But just like in the cases with the man from Chicago and the one in Miami, there was no mention of who the supplier was. And that's when the 3D printers came into play and pretty much made it impossible to find the original source. The only lead we really have before the printers was China. But it's not like there are some freedom of information requests we can get from the Chinese government, so we have to do our own homework on this one. Now, reportedly, they were found on sites like AliExpress, Wish, and even Amazon under fake names, of which I will be showing none of you.
Was ordering switches on Amazon and AliExpress. That's crazy, bro.
So that I in no way promote anybody looking for these things. Please, for the love of God, don't. So we have legitimate and illegitimate businessmen getting their hands on these products and selling them until they end up on the streets in the hand of teenagers. From 2019 to 2023, 11,088 of them were recovered by the ATF, with nearly 6,000 being recovered in 2023 alone. And here is a list of cities where most of them were found, although these are not including the places where the sellers were found, as it doesn't include Miami, Kansas, or the other man that was found in West Virginia to be 3D printing them. Now, I don't always like to get into conspiracy theories, and I definitely don't want to get on the bad side of any foreign country.
I ain't gonna lie though. If you really from Chicago, you know about, you could call it a rumor, I guess, if you want to, but if you really from Chicago, you know about like crates, just these military crates popping up in the hood. You'll go in an alley one day and somebody or somebody just mysteriously telling a nigga in the hood like, hey, hit this train at this time. There's gonna be a lot of guns on there. You know what I'm saying? This things happens in Chicago, you feel me? I don't know if they happen anymore, but they used to for sure. You see what I'm saying? So I'm putting it to you like this. I wouldn't be surprised if it's some switches in them crates, in them drop-offs, on them trains. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't be surprised if the government putting the switches in Chicago so we can keep you know what I'm saying?
All signs seem to point to China. In Chicago, I grew up hearing the old heads say that the government dropped off crates full of weapons in the hood and even had contacts in the hood that distribute them to everybody. And I must admit that with how armed some of the kids are today, it's hard for me to believe that it's all just coming from some guys in Indiana. Although Indiana being the closest open carry state to Chicago, this has been the source of at least some of them. But nah, when I was a teenager like 10 years ago, it was extremely easy to get anything, like ammunition on GTA. And the way it looks today, it's only gotten easier. The 3D printers did not help though. Why was this ever a thing that could be sold to the public? When I was in college, I once listened to some kid out in the country tell me how he would create a booby trap for a home invader just out of things he had lying around his house. This man should never be able to legally purchase a 3D printer. But I'm not here to debate whether the Chinese government is responsible for this. I want to know how these things got in Chicago, because likely that'll be the same answer as how they got into every other city as well. Now, the man from 2002 has to be the best lead, and he was never actually arrested by federal authorities in the US. Basically, an informant told the ATF that this guy was selling these things on the internet to people in the United States all the way back in 2002. But one problem, he was in Argentina, and after rounding up several items that he sold to people in the United States, the US sent over a request for his extradition to face charges, but Argentina said no. And using the information they got from the United States, they just arrested him and charged him in Argentina. Now, in 2018, his lawyer even sent over a request to the United States to just toss out his case, since it was obvious that they weren't ever going to get their hands on him. And this request also helped me put a name and a face to this mysterious man, Ricardo, or just Richard. Now, he's an older man living in Martinez, an affluent suburb of Buenos Aires, and apparently, he was just an all-out arms dealer who sold equipment to rival groups fighting in Brazil as well, such as Comando Vermelho, whom I covered in my Brazil video, and Primeiro Comando de Capital, who I also covered in my Brazil video. And if you haven't seen it and don't know just how deadly these two groups are, I seriously suggest you check it out. And even though the U.S. refused to throw out his case, they still have been unable to extradite him. But it appears that sometime in 2019, his home in Argentina was raided and he was once again arrested for smuggling.
Damn.
But it's unclear what his punishment was, since his case from 2003.
They say he was charged with trafficking 2,743 weapons.
Again arrested for smuggling. But it's unclear what his punishment was, since his case from 2003, he only spent a year in jail and he was never actually even prosecuted. And that's because it was proven that the Argentine court that charged him had not complied with the Criminal Code of Procedure. But as of right before the pandemic, he was charged in Argentina with trafficking 2,743 weapons.
Damn.
Now the ATF learned about him less than 10 years after the creator of the switch had it patented. And it's possible that Ricardo or some associate of his stole the design or just had their own design to begin with.
Right.
But that still doesn't explain how it got to China. But China being the birthplace of gunpowder, they could have just had their own design as well. And both of these scenarios could have easily culminated in the device being found in the streets of Chicago.
Yeah.
Because once something like this makes its way into
somebody getting rich, think about somebody's making these switches and somebody is getting overly rich as hell off of this. That's
United States, and especially after it's mass produced, it just becomes another product to be used by the public, albeit illegally. And I doubt if the guy in Chicago that was arrested even knew the original source, because by 2019, it was already available for sale online. And just because a man in the US had the design patented, that doesn't mean that he was the first to come up with it. Likely, this was just something that was bound to spread once it was created. Just as humanity has come a long way from the musket and the blunderbuss, the march toward destruction is ongoing. But at least it's not as bad as it was when I was a kid. Back in those days, getting caught with a gun in Chicago meant that you would do like 60 days and be back on the streets. Now, at least half of the time, I guess, when you get caught with a switch, you don't have to worry about your local police because the alphabet boys are picking up all of these cases. But there's no real need for something so destructive to be on the streets in the first place. And it just reminds me of a rapper. He might have been promoting the violence, but when Young Pappy said 2-3 shots he hit the ground don't need a lot of rounds, it at least made more sense than what's going on today. But that's all I got for today, man.
That's all I'm saying. Like, dang, y'all, why y'all need switch? You can't control the switch, bro. Just pop the nigga.